For generations of my family have tended the soil of Willow Creek Farm, but nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered beneath the floorboards of our century-old barn. While replacing rotted timber during renovations, my hammer broke, through into a hidden chamber that had been sealed away since 1943. What I found inside didn't just uncover a forgotten chapter of agricultural history. It revealed a legacy that could save our farm and change the future of farming itself. And then the corporate executives and lawyers came, determined to claim my discovery as their own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Mitchell. I'm the daughter and now reluctant partner of Robert Mitchell, fourth-generation owner of Willow Creek Farm, a 175-acre piece of Iowa heartland that my great-grandfather established in 1892, just outside the small town of Mapleton. Our family has worked this land through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the farming crisis of the 1980s, and countless personal struggles. The Mitchell farm has survived it all, until now. These days, family farms like ours are becoming an endangered species, squeezed between massive corporate agricultural operations, increasingly unpredictable weather patterns, and relentless development. Pressure that's consuming rural land at an alarming rate. Last fall, I was facing the harsh reality that I might witness the end of the Mitchell farming legacy. 3 consecutive years of drought had decimated our corn yields. First came the unusually dry spring that left the seedlings struggling to establish root systems. Then the scorching June heat that withered the emerging crops, followed by the August drought that finished off what little had survived. No matter what we planted or how carefully we timed it, the changing climate seemed determined to break. Our spirit, along with our bank account. Every morning, I'd watch my father Robert check the mailbox with a sense of dread. The bank was sending increasingly threatening letters about foreclosure, each one more official and final than the last. The most recent notice gave us just 90 days to make good on our payments or lose everything. Meanwhile, Harrington Agricultural Industries, the corporate farming giant buying up struggling family operations throughout the county, had already made 3 offers on our property. Each offer was higher than the last, as if they could smell our desperation growing. The latest envelope contained architectural renderings of what they called Willow Creek Estates, a planned community of 50 luxury homes with artificial ponds, where generations of Mitchells had cultivated crops. Just seeing our family name co-opted for their development plans made my stomach turn. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that our farm was failing despite being situated on what was once considered some of the most fertile and historically significant agricultural land in the state. My grandmother Eleanor would sit on the porch, swing on summer evenings, pointing towards Silver Creek as she told me stories about how this property had played a crucial role during the agricultural innovations of the 1940s. "This land remembers, Emma," she would tell me, her eyes distant as if seeing ghosts walking across our fields. "The soil holds the memory of every seed, every dream, every discovery that took root here. Some flourished, others were buried, but nothing is truly lost." Those stories seemed like distant fairy tales now, as I looked out at our struggling fields, wondering how many more growing seasons, if any, we had left before the bulldozers came for our heritage. Modern farming methods had changed everything. The introduction of proprietary genetically modified seeds resistant to specific herbicides had transformed agriculture, but it also created a dependency on expensive inputs that small farmers like us struggled to afford. Market demands constantly shifted, favoring large operations that could quickly adapt. Rising fuel costs, aging equipment, and increasingly unpredictable weather patterns had slowly stripped away the connection between my family and this land. The soil that had sustained my ancestors through the nation's most turbulent times now seemed to be giving up on us. Or perhaps we were giving up on it. Each morning I found it harder to lace up my boots and face another day of fighting what increasingly felt like a losing battle. My father had always been the eternal optimist, a man who believed that next season would always be better. But lately, I'd catch him staring at the fields with an expression I'd never seen before: defeat. At 64, with a bad back and worse knees, he wasn't in any condition to single-handedly save our struggling operation. And as his only child, with a degree in agricultural science I'd barely put to use during my 5 years working in the city, I wasn't sure I was either. Our neighbor Thomas Wilson had already surrendered to the inevitable. His family's farm had stood alongside ours for nearly as long, 120 years of shared fence lines, shared equipment, shared struggles. Just last month, I'd watched him sign the final paperwork, transferring his property to Harrington Agricultural Industries, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he surrendered his family legacy for a sum that probably wouldn't sustain him through retirement. The bulldozers arrived the very next day, uprooting century-old oak trees and tearing down the barn his grandfather had built by hand after returning from World War I. I stood at our property line, watching as they erased generations of Wilson history in a single afternoon. "You can't fight progress, Emma," Thomas had told me later that evening, not meeting my eyes as we shared a somber cup of coffee on our porch. His voice held the hollow resignation of a man trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. "Farming's a losing game these days. The big operations and developers have already won. Take the money while they're still offering it. At least then something of your family's work survives." Maybe he was right. Maybe farmers like us were just stubborn relics clinging to an outdated way of life in a world that had moved on. The Harrington offer sitting on our kitchen table represented more money than we'd ever see from farming. It could pay off our debts, fund my father's retirement, perhaps even finance a new start somewhere else. But every time I picked up the phone to call them back, I could almost hear my grandmother Eleanor's voice echoing across the decades. "This land doesn't just grow crops, Emma, it grows possibilities. And some possibilities aren't finished revealing themselves yet." I was desperate for a solution, any solution. The foreclosure date was just 3 months away, and we didn't have nearly enough to make the payment. The crop insurance wouldn't cover half our losses from the drought, and equipment repairs had drained what little savings we had left. The tractor was making an ominous knocking sound that we couldn't afford to have diagnosed. The irrigation system needed updating. The barn roof had started leaking in 3 places. Each day brought a new problem we lacked the resources to fix. Something had to change, or this would be the last planting season a Mitchell worked these fields. That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories about the seed sanctuary that was supposedly hidden somewhere on our property. As a child, I'd assumed it was just another tall tale, like her stories about how certain plants would whisper their needs if you listened closely enough, or how the position of barn swallows' nests could predict the severity of the coming winter. Grandma Eleanor would describe how her father-in-law, my great-grandfather William Mitchell, had constructed a hidden storage space during World War II. "The old man was walking a dangerous line," she would say in a hushed voice, even decades after any danger had passed. "Protecting what others wanted to control, preserving what others might have destroyed." According to family legend, William had created some kind of underground chamber, a place to hide and preserve heirloom seed varieties and agricultural research during a time when government and early agribusiness interests were pushing for standardization and control of the nation's food supply. Iowa had been a particularly vital place during the war years, its farms feeding both American troops and hungry allied nations. Being seen as hindering the official agricultural policies could brand someone as unpatriotic or worse. Yet allegedly, my great-grandfather had risked it, believing that agricultural diversity might someday be more valuable than short-term productivity. After the war ended, he'd supposedly sealed up this chamber, telling his children it should remain closed until the world remembers what farming is truly for, not just production, but preservation. No one in living memory had ever found this mythical place, and most of the family had written it off as just another colorful exaggeration from our family's past. Even my father dismissed it as grandma's fairy tales, with nothing to lose. But a few hours of time I probably should have spent fixing irrigation lines. I decided to see if there was any truth to these old stories. What I didn't expect was how that decision would unearth not just a physical chamber, but long-buried secrets that would change everything for me, for this farm, and for our understanding of a pivotal moment in agricultural history. That evening, I found myself in our farmhouse attic, surrounded by generations of family artifacts. The air was thick with dust and memories, heavy with the weight of time. Ancient trunks and weathered furniture crowded beneath the sloped ceiling, each piece holding silent witness to my family's history. I hadn't been up here in years, not since my mother passed away, and I'd helped my father sort through her belongings. I came looking for anything that might shed light on Grandma Eleanor's stories about the Seed Sanctuary. If such a place truly existed, there had to be some record of it, some clue to its location beyond fading oral traditions. In the far corner sat my grandfather Harold's old military trunk, its olive-drab surface dulled by decades of handling. I remembered how Grandma had let me peek inside as a child, showing me treasures she claimed were only valuable to those who knew their stories. Back then, I was more interested in riding horses and playing in the creek than listening to an old woman's tales.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Now I desperately wished I'd paid more attention. The trunk's metal hinges creaked in protest as I lifted the lid, releasing the scent of mothballs and old paper. Inside lay neatly folded uniforms, yellowed letters, and bundles of documents tied with faded twine. Beneath these, I found a small leather journal, my grandfather's wartime diary, its pages brittle and browned at the edges. As I carefully turned the delicate pages, I realized this wasn't just any diary. While most entries detailed his experiences, serving in Europe during World War II, the final section contained stories his father William had told him, recorded in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Stories about the farm, about the war years at home, about the difficult choices made in desperate times. Most importantly, there were specific references to the hidden chamber. Father told me today about the sanctuary beneath the north barn. One entry from 1947 read, said he sealed it after the Harrison incident when the patent attorneys started asking questions, said it contained specimens and proof the world wasn't ready to appreciate yet. When I asked when it should be opened, he said when the nation truly needs to remember that abundance comes from diversity, not uniformity. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the attic's drafty windows, the north barn. I knew exactly where that was. The oldest structure on our property, the one with the leaking roof that I'd just started renovating last week. Another entry caught my eye, dated August 17th, 1950. Father showed me the marker today, said if anything ever happened to him, this would point the way. A simple pattern in the floorboards, third stall from the east wall, where the wood grain forms a subtle arrow. He made me swear never to mention it to outsiders. Some treasures need to stay buried until scarcity makes their value obvious, he said. The journal contained other cryptic references, measurements from the main support beam to the north wall, mentions of a false floor and reinforced chamber, lists of content stored within, including seed varieties, research documents, and what? Harold enigmatically called the proof of Mitchell priority. Most intriguing was a hand-drawn map tucked between the pages, showing the north barn as it had looked during the 1940s. The stalls were clearly marked, along with several other features, many of which no longer existed. A dotted line connected various points, forming what appeared to be directions through the structure, ending at a spot marked with a small X. As I studied these materials, my grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from the pages. These weren't just stories meant to entertain a child on summer evenings. They were deliberately preserved clues passed down through generations, waiting for someone who might need them. Waiting, perhaps, for a moment when the farm itself needed saving. I spent hours in that attic, piecing together fragments of information from the journal, old letters, and family photographs. What emerged was a picture far more complex than I'd imagined. William Mitchell hadn't been simply a farmer trying to maintain traditional practices during wartime. According to these records, he'd been actively involved in revolutionary agricultural research, developing early drought-resistant crop varieties and sustainable farming methods decades ahead of their time. Iowa's position during World War II had made it the nation's breadbasket, under immense pressure to maximize production at any cost. It saw some of the first major pushes toward agricultural industrialization and standardization of seed stock. Within this environment, my great-grandfather had apparently maintained a secret seed bank of diverse crop varieties, preserving agricultural biodiversity even as national policy pushed toward monoculture. A letter written by William himself and addressed to my grandfather was particularly revealing. What I have done, I did not do for glory or recognition, but because I could not turn away from the truth, regardless of how inconvenient. Some will call me old-fashioned or resistant to progress. Perhaps I am, but I answer to a higher loyalty than any temporary policy can claim. The more I read, the more I began to understand why William had sealed the chamber after the war. It contained evidence of experimental crop breeding that challenged the patents being filed by early agribusiness companies, showing that many innovations, they claimed, had actually been developed first on small farms like ours. Such revelations could have brought legal repercussions in the intellectual property battles that were beginning to reshape agriculture. But there was something else, something mentioned repeatedly but never fully explained. References to the key Mitchell strain, the drought solution, and evidence that would change everything. Whatever these materials were, William had considered them important enough to preserve, but controversial enough to conceal. As midnight approached, I found myself surrounded by piles of family history, my mind racing with possibilities. If the chamber existed, if it had remained sealed and undisturbed for over 80 years, what condition would its contents be in? Could there truly be historically significant agricultural materials preserved inside? And if so, what would they be worth? That last question gave me pause. I wasn't thinking about historical value or scientific significance. I was calculating potential financial value. The shameful thought crossed my mind that perhaps whatever lay hidden in this chamber could save the farm from foreclosure. Rare seed varieties that could be sold to agricultural collections or research universities for enough to clear our debts. I immediately felt a stab of guilt. My great-grandfather had hidden these materials to protect them and their potential value to future generations, not so they could be sold off by a desperate descendant 4 generations later. Yet what choice did I have? The farm would be lost, regardless if we couldn't make the mortgage payments. At least this way, I might preserve the land itself, even if I had to sacrifice whatever history lay beneath it. With this uncomfortable rationalization, I carefully returned the journal and papers to the trunk, except for the map, which I tucked into my pocket. Tomorrow, I decided I would search for the marker in the north barn. If Grandpa Harold's records were accurate, it might lead me to the hidden chamber. If not, I'd have wasted a day I couldn't spare on a wild goose chase born of desperation. As I turned off the attic light, a strange feeling settled over me, the sense that I was being watched by unseen eyes, not in a threatening way, but as if the past itself was observing my actions, judging my intentions. I told myself it was just exhaustion combined with too many hours spent among the relics of the dead. Back in my bedroom, I placed the fragile map on my nightstand and tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with fields of unfamiliar crops stretching toward the horizon, plants with colors and forms I'd never seen before, whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. I awoke at dawn, the map still beside me, my mind made up. Historical guilt and ghostly dreams aside, I needed to know if the chamber existed. The farm's survival might depend on it. Within the hour, I was in the North Barn, armed with a crowbar, hammer, and flashlight. The renovation I'd started earlier in the week had already exposed some of the original floorboards in the third stall, the exact location mentioned in my grandfather's journal. The morning sun slanted through gaps in the weathered walls, casting long shadows across the interior. I knelt down to examine the floorboards more carefully, brushing away decades of accumulated dust and dirt. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just worn oak planks, their surfaces marked by the passage of time and countless hooves. But as I shifted position, allowing the sunlight to strike the floor at a different angle, I noticed it, a subtle pattern in the wood grain of several adjacent boards. Where the surrounding planks showed straight parallel lines, these formed a gentle curve, creating what could indeed be interpreted as an arrow pointing toward the north wall. It was so subtle that, unless you were specifically looking for it and the light hit it just right, you'd never notice. Following the direction indicated, I moved to the north wall and began carefully examining the area. Nothing immediately stood out, just the usual barn construction of the era. I tapped along the wall, listening for any hollow sound that might indicate a concealed space beyond, but everything seemed solid. Returning to the floorboards with the unusual grain pattern, I knelt again and ran my fingers along the edges. There, almost imperceptible, one board had a slightly larger gap along one side than the others. I inserted the edge of my crowbar and applied gentle pressure. To my surprise, the board lifted easily, revealing a small metal ring flush with the underside, a hidden pull handle. My heart pounding, I grasped it and pulled upward. With the creaking protest of hinges that hadn't moved in decades, a 2-foot square section of the floor lifted, revealing a dark space below. I directed my flashlight into the opening, its beam penetrating the darkness to reveal a set of narrow wooden steps descending about 8 feet into the earth. The wood appeared remarkably preserved, protected from moisture and weather by the clever design of the entrance. My great-grandfather had been an ingenious builder, constructing this hidden entrance to be simultaneously accessible yet completely camouflaged. The trapdoor's underside was affixed with the same floorboards as the surrounding area, making it indistinguishable when closed. Caution temporarily overcame curiosity as I tested the first step with my weight. Despite their age, the stairs held firm. William had constructed this place to last, using what appeared to be cedar, naturally rot-resistant for the subterranean elements. Each step creaked, but supported my weight as I slowly descended into the chamber that had remained sealed for more than 80 years. At the bottom of the stairs, I swept my flashlight beam around, revealing a space larger than I had anticipated, roughly 12 feet square, with walls reinforced by a combination of timber framing and what looked like repurposed concrete forms. The ceiling was supported by massive oak beams, some showing minor signs of age, but none having failed. The floor was packed earth covered with bricks laid in a herringbone pattern, still level and intact after all these years. But it was the contents of the chamber that took my breath away. Against one wall stood rows of handmade wooden cabinets, their glass-fronted doors still intact, revealing hundreds of mason jars of various sizes. Each jar contained seeds, thousands of seeds, all carefully labeled in faded handwriting with names, dates, and notes. Along another wall were metal filing cabinets, seemingly untouched by rust, thanks to the chamber's remarkably dry conditions. A sturdy wooden workbench occupied one corner, its surface covered with leather-bound journals, loose papers weighted down with smooth riverstones, and several microscopes of varying sizes. Most remarkable of all was a series of complicated diagrams pinned to the walls, hand-drawn illustrations of plant breeding experiments, crop rotations, and soil management systems far ahead of their time. Some appeared to show early concepts of what we now call sustainable agriculture, companion planting, and drought-resistant crop development, practices only recently discovered by modern agricultural science. The air in the chamber felt charged with history, with secrets preserved in darkness for generations, waiting for someone to bring them back into the light. I moved my flashlight beam across the space again, noting other details: glass specimen bottles containing soil samples, primitive hygrometers and barometers for environmental monitoring, what appeared to be early photographic equipment, and, strangest of all, a large metal lockbox positioned prominently on the workbench. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the discovery, a disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if this place contained materials that would be considered worthless today? The journal had mentioned experimental crops and research, but agricultural. Science had advanced enormously since the 1940s. What seemed revolutionary then might be common knowledge now. With trepidation, I approached the workbench and examined one of the open journals. The meticulous handwriting detailed experiments with corn varieties specifically bred to require minimal water while maintaining yield, exactly the kind of drought-resistant crops that modern agriculture was desperately trying to develop for our changing climate. I turned to the seed cabinets, shining my light on jar after jar of preserved genetic diversity, varieties with names I'd never heard before: Mitchell's Golden Dry Weather Corn, Silver Creek Hardy Wheat, Eleanor's Rainbow Bean. Some labels included notes like survives 40 days without rain or resistant to corn borer without chemical treatment. With growing excitement, I realized I might be looking at a treasure trove of agricultural genetics, heirloom varieties, that could contain traits lost to modern monoculture farming, potentially holding solutions to the very climate challenges threatening our farm today. I approached the metal lockbox, intrigued by its prominent placement. Unlike everything else in the chamber, it had a modern padlock securing it, not original to the 1940s period. Someone, perhaps my grandfather, had visited this chamber since its creation and secured whatever was inside with additional protection. The key was nowhere to be found, but among my tools was a bolt cutter. With a silent apology to whoever had locked it, I cut through the padlock and lifted the lid. Inside lay several manila folders, their edges crisp as if recently placed, and a sealed envelope addressed simply to the Mitchell who finds this when it's needed. My hands trembling slightly, I opened the envelope to find a letter dated 1972, decades after the chamber was created, written in my grandfather Harold's handwriting. To my future grandchild, for I believe it will be one of you who finds this place. If you're reading this, our family farm must be facing its greatest challenge yet. The chamber you've discovered was my father's creation, but I've maintained it secretly throughout my lifetime, adding my own research and evidence to his collection. What you hold in your hands is the documentation of a great injustice and a potential salvation. The folders contain patent applications, research notes, and photographic proof that the Mitchell drought-resistant corn strain was developed on our farm between 1938 and 1943, years before Harrington Agricultural claimed to have invented it. When they came to our farm in 1943 for a government-sponsored agricultural tour, James Harrington saw my father's experimental fields. 6 months later, Harrington filed patents on suspiciously similar corn varieties, launching their company's meteoric rise to becoming one of the nation's largest agricultural corporations. My father sealed this chamber rather than fight. The legal battle would have bankrupted us, and in the patriotic fervor of wartime, challenging a company that was promising to feed our troops would have been seen as unpatriotic. I've preserved not only his original genetics, but added proof I've gathered over decades. The current Harrington drought-resistant seed lines, which they charge farmers a premium for, are direct descendants of Mitchell innovation. Use this information wisely. It could be leverage, bargaining power, or, if needed, the basis of a legal claim long overdue. The seeds themselves may be even more valuable in the long run. Genuine genetic diversity in an age of increasing climate uncertainty. What was buried here wasn't just seeds, but truth. Either might save our family land. Your loving grandfather, Harold Mitchell. I sat on a wooden crate, letter in hand, as the implications began to sink in. This wasn't just a fascinating historical discovery, it was potentially explosive. Harrington Agricultural Industries, the very company trying to buy our farm, had apparently built their initial success on stolen innovation from my family. The folders contained exactly what my grandfather had described. Meticulously preserved evidence, including dated photographs, research journals with consistent handwriting, and increasingly detailed observations, even saved newspaper clippings about local agricultural fairs, where William Mitchell had exhibited his drought-resistant corn years before Harrington's patent filing. Most damning of all was a visitor log from the government tour, showing James Harrington's signature and specific notes about his interest in the experimental fields, followed by patent applications filed 6 months later with suspiciously similar descriptions, but no reference to the Mitchell farm. If authenticated, these documents wouldn't just provide a historical footnote, they could potentially challenge the foundation patents that had launched Harrington Agricultural Industries into the agricultural giant it was today. Patents that had made billions of dollars over decades. Patents they were still defending aggressively against competitors. My thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of a vehicle approaching on our driveway. I checked my watch, surprised to find that nearly 5 hours had passed since I'd entered the barn. I hadn't told my father about my search, and we weren't expecting visitors. Quickly, I gathered the most critical documents, my grandfather's letter and the folder containing the patent evidence, tucking them into my jacket. I climbed the stairs, exited the chamber, and carefully lowered the trapdoor back into place. It wouldn't fool anyone looking closely, but it wasn't immediately obvious from a casual glance. As I left the barn and rounded the corner of the farmhouse, I saw a sleek black SUV parked in our yard. A woman in an expensive business suit was just getting out, consulting something on her tablet. She looked up at my approach. "Ms. Mitchell," she called, her voice carrying a note of professional authority. "I'm Victoria Blackwell from Harrington Agricultural Industries. I was hoping to follow up on our previous offer for your property. Is your father available?" Looking at her standing there, representative of the very company that had apparently stolen my great-grandfather's innovation and now wanted to take our land too, I felt a surge of emotions. Anger, vindication, and something else I hadn't felt in months. Hope. What I'd found beneath the barn floor wasn't just a collection of historical curiosities. It was leverage, evidence, and possibly the key to saving not just our farm, but perhaps transforming the future of agriculture itself. "I'm afraid my father's not available right now," I replied, thinking quickly. "But I've recently discovered some interesting family history that might affect our discussions about the property." Perhaps we should reschedule when our attorney can be present. Victoria Blackwell's professional smile returned quickly, but a glimmer of suspicion remained in her eyes. She tucked a strand of perfectly styled hair behind her ear and glanced at her tablet. Family history. How interesting, she said with practiced warmth. Though I'm not sure how that would affect our very generous offer, the appraisal was quite thorough. I clutched the folder with my grandfather's letter more tightly against my side. You'd be surprised what can affect property valuations, especially regarding intellectual property rights and patent histories. The subtle shift in her posture told me everything I needed to know. Victoria was more than just a real estate representative for Harrington Agricultural Industries. She knew exactly what kind of history might be buried on our land. I see, she replied, her voice cooling several degrees. Well, if you've uncovered any historical documents, Harrington would be happy to have our archival team evaluate them. We maintain an extensive corporate heritage collection. I bet they do, I thought, imagining how many inconvenient discoveries had been permanently archived in their corporate vaults, never to see daylight again. I think we'll have our own experts look at them first, I said, but I'll certainly let you know if we find anything relevant to Harrington's interests. Victoria handed me her business card, heavy cardstock with embossed lettering that probably cost more than what we spent on groceries in a week. Please do. And Ms. Mitchell? Historical research can be misleading without proper context. Amateur interpretations of old documents often lead to misunderstandings. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between us. I simply nodded and watched as she got back into her sleek vehicle and drove away, gravel crunching under expensive tires. Only when the dust settled did I realize I was trembling, not with fear, but with a strange cocktail of anger and exhilaration. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew could help me navigate this situation. Sarah, it's Emma Mitchell. Remember how you always said you owed me after I helped you pass advanced biology in high school? I think it's time to collect. Sarah Jenkins had gone from being my lab partner to becoming Mapleton's most respected attorney. Her specialty was agricultural and environmental law, exactly what I needed now. Emma, Sarah's voice came through, warm but tired. It's been a while. What's up? I found something on the farm, something big. I need legal advice, but more importantly, I need someone I can trust. Can you come out here? Lo, there must have been something in my voice that conveyed the urgency, because Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll be there in an hour. While waiting for Sarah, I returned to the hidden chamber, this time bringing proper lighting. With a battery-powered lantern illuminating the space, I began methodically photographing everything: the seed jars, the journals, the diagrams on the walls, the filing cabinets and their contents. If Harrington somehow got access to this place before we could secure it, I wanted documentation of everything. The magnitude of what my ancestors had created here was even more apparent in proper light. This wasn't just a seed collection. It was a comprehensive agricultural research facility decades ahead of its time. My great-grandfather William had been meticulously crossbreeding corn varieties to create strains that required minimal water while maintaining high yields, the holy grail of modern agricultural research. The journals detailed countless experiments, successes and failures, all carefully documented with scientific precision. William Mitchell hadn't been just a farmer. He'd been a self-taught agricultural scientist conducting groundbreaking research without institutional support or recognition. Most fascinating were his notes on sustainable farming methods that maintained soil health without chemical fertilizers, techniques that modern regenerative agriculture was only now rediscovering. There were detailed records of crop rotations, companion planting strategies, and natural pest management that had allowed the Mitchell farm to thrive even during the challenging war years when chemical inputs were rationed. As I carefully examined one of the seed jars labeled Mitchell's Golden Dry Weather Corn 1942, I heard the sound of tires on our driveway. Quickly securing the chamber, I made my way back to the house just as Sarah was pulling up in her modest sedan. Sarah Jenkins had changed little since high school. The same practical short haircut, sensible clothes, and no-nonsense demeanor that had made her both respected and somewhat feared in our small town. As the daughter of a farmer herself, she understood the challenges facing family operations, which had driven her career choice. "This better be good, Emma," she said, stepping out of her car. "I rescheduled a meeting with the county commissioners. For this, it's good," I assured her. "Life-changing good, or terrifying good, depending on how you look at it." Over coffee at our worn kitchen table, I laid out everything I'd discovered: the hidden chamber, the seed collection, my grandfather's letter, and the damning evidence that Harrington Agricultural Industries had built its early success on innovations stolen from my family. Sarah remained silent as I talked, examining the documents with a lawyer's critical eye. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "If these can be authenticated," she said slowly, "you're sitting on a legal bombshell. The statute of limitations has long passed on the original theft, but the ongoing use of these genetic materials in their current product lines, that's a different story. What does that mean for us, for the farm?" Sarah tapped the folder containing my grandfather's letter. "Best case, leverage. Harrington won't want this story getting out. Worst case, they'll claim the documents are forgeries and bury you in legal proceedings until the bank forecloses. So what do we do? First, we need independent verification. I know a professor at Iowa State who specializes in agricultural history, Dr. Nathaniel Cooper. If anyone can authenticate these documents and understand their significance, it's him. And second," Sarah's expression hardened, "we secure everything. That underground chamber needs to be protected. If Harrington gets even a hint of what's down there, they'll do whatever it takes to access it before we can document everything properly." "Victoria Blackwell was just here," I admitted. "From Harrington. I may have implied we found something of historical significance." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Then we don't have much time. They're already suspicious. Call your father. We need to bring him up to speed. And I'm calling Dr. Cooper right now." My father returned from town just as Sarah was finishing. Her call with Dr. Cooper. The look on his face when we explained what I'd found ranged from disbelief to cautious hope, to something I hadn't seen in years, a fierce determination. "Dad, why didn't you ever mention Grandpa Harold's suspicions about Harrington stealing our family's research?" I asked. He sank heavily into his chair. "Because they were just that, suspicions. Harold talked about it sometimes when he'd had a few too many, but he never showed me any proof. I figured it was just an old man's bitterness about how the big operations had pushed out the family farms." "Well, he had proof," I said, sliding the documents across the table. "He just kept it hidden until it was needed most." As my father read through his own father's letter, tears formed in his eyes. "All these years," he whispered. "All these years we've been struggling, and the answer was right under our feet. Dr. Cooper can be here tomorrow morning." Sarah announced he's bringing equipment to properly document everything. In the meantime, I suggest we take turns keeping an eye on the property. Harrington won't hesitate to send people snooping around if they think there's something here that threatens them. That night, none of us slept much. My father took the first watch, patrolling the farmyard with our old shotgun, not loaded, but imposing enough to discourage casual trespassers. I relieved him at 2 a.m., walking the perimeter of our property until dawn painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold. As I watched the sun rise over fields that had sustained my family for generations, I felt a profound connection to the land I hadn't experienced in years. Working in the city, I'd forgotten what it meant to be a Mitchell, to be part of something larger than myself, a legacy of innovation and stewardship passed down through blood and soil. Whether we saved the farm or lost it, I knew in that moment that I would never fully abandon this land. Whatever happened next, part of me would always belong here. Dr. Nathaniel Cooper arrived promptly at 8 a.m., his university vehicle laden with equipment. A tall, lean man in his 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime in academic pursuit. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Sarah has told me you've made quite the discovery. I must say I'm intrigued." "Thank you for coming, Dr. Cooper. I hope we're not wasting your time." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "In 40 years of studying agricultural history, I've learned that family legends often contain more truth than the official records. Shall we see what your ancestors left behind?" Leading Dr. Cooper to the barn, I couldn't help noticing his expression of growing excitement as I explained what I'd found. When I opened the hidden trapdoor and revealed the staircase descending into darkness, he actually gasped. "Extraordinary," he murmured, "simply extraordinary." For the next several hours, Dr. Cooper methodically documented the chamber and its contents, photographing, measuring, and carefully examining each item. He handled the seed jars with particular reverence, noting the varieties and dates with increasing animation. "Do you understand what you have here, Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, cradling a jar of corn seeds as if it were a priceless artifact. "This isn't just a seed collection. It's a living time capsule of agricultural biodiversity that's been lost to modern farming. Some of these varieties probably don't exist anywhere else in the world." "Are they valuable?" I asked, thinking of the impending foreclosure. "Valuable?" Dr. Cooper laughed softly. "In purely commercial terms, incalculably so. These seeds could contain genetic traits for drought resistance, pest resistance, and yield that modern agribusiness has been trying to engineer for decades. But their true value goes beyond money. This is agricultural heritage that belongs to humanity." As he continued examining the chamber, his excitement gave way to a more somber appreciation when he reached the documents detailing Harrington's appropriation of my great-grandfather's research. "I've long suspected something like this," he admitted, carefully turning pages of photographic evidence. The sudden appearance of Harrington's drought-resistant corn varieties in 1944 never made sense given the company's previous research trajectory. They simply didn't have the breeding program in place to make that kind of breakthrough. "So you think these documents are authentic?" Sarah asked. Dr. Cooper nodded slowly. "Without question. The paper, the ink formulations, the photographic, developing techniques, all consistent with the period. More importantly, the research methodology described in these journals shows a sophisticated understanding of plant genetics that few possessed in that era. Your great-grandfather was a remarkable scientist, Ms. Mitchell, despite his lack of formal education." "What do we do with all this?" my father asked, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the chamber. He'd been silently taking it, all in, occasionally running his weathered hand over the workbench where his grandfather had made discoveries that should have changed his family's fortunes. "That," Dr. Cooper said carefully, "depends on what you want to achieve. If your goal is simply to save your farm, these materials give you significant leverage with Harrington. If you're seeking justice or recognition for your great-grandfather's work, that's a more complicated path." "What about the seeds themselves?" I asked. "Could we use them to develop our own drought-resistant crops? That's what we need most. Right now." Dr. Cooper's expression brightened. "With proper testing and cultivation, absolutely. Many of these varieties could be regenerated within a growing season or two. The genetics appear remarkably advanced for their era. possibly better suited to current climate conditions than many modern hybrids. "Then that's what we do," my father said firmly. "We use William's work the way he intended, to keep this farm alive and productive." "There's another option," Sarah interjected. "The patent documentation here shows that Harrington's current commercial seed lines are derived from what your great-grandfather developed. That gives you a potential claim to patent infringement damages, or at minimum, a negotiating position for a settlement." We were discussing these possibilities when a sound from above caught our attention. The crunch of tires on gravel, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. My father was up the stairs first, peering cautiously out the barn door. 3 SUVs, he reported grimly, Harrington logos, and what looks like private security. Sarah's expression hardened. "They're moving faster than I expected. They must be really worried about what you found." "What do we do?" I asked, suddenly afraid. The chamber felt vulnerable, it's precious. Contents exposed after decades of protection. "We face them," my father said, straightening his shoulders. "This is still our land." "Not without preparation," Sarah countered. "Dr. Cooper, continue documenting everything. Get as much evidence secured as possible. Mr. Mitchell, Emma, come with me. We need to establish clear boundaries right now." As we emerged from the barn, Richard Harrington himself was stepping out of the lead vehicle, a man I'd only seen in newspaper photographs and company advertisements. In his mid-60s, impeccably dressed in what looked like a casual outfit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, he projected an aura of absolute authority. Flanking him were Victoria Blackwell, 2 men in suits who screamed, corporate attorneys, and 4 uniformed security personnel, each wearing the distinctive green and gold Harrington logo. "Mr. Mitchell," Harrington called, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. Victoria mentioned you'd discovered some historical materials that might interest our company archives. I thought I'd come see for myself." My father stepped forward, placing himself between Harrington's entourage and the barn. "This is private property, Mr. Harrington. You and your people are trespassing." Now, Harrington smiled indulgently. "There's no need for hostility. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for any historical artifacts you've discovered. Well, above market value. Consider it a premium added to our already substantial offer for the farm itself." Sarah moved to stand beside my father. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Sarah Jenkins, attorney for the Mitchell family. Any materials discovered on this property belong to the Mitchells and are currently being evaluated by independent academic experts. If you're interested in discussing them, you can schedule a meeting through my office." One of Harrington's lawyers stepped forward, a thin man with cold eyes. "Ms. Jenkins, we have reason to believe that materials on this property may contain proprietary information belonging to Harrington Agricultural Industries. We are prepared to seek an emergency court order if necessary." "On what grounds?" Sarah challenged. "You have no evidence of what's been discovered here. A concerned employee reported potential corporate espionage," the lawyer responded smoothly. "Given the proximity to our research facilities and the Mitchell family's known financial distress, we have reasonable cause for concern. It was a transparent fabrication, but it was clear they were prepared to use any legal means necessary to gain access to the chamber." "That's quite an accusation," I said, stepping forward despite Sarah's warning glance. "Especially considering what we've actually found are records showing how your company stole its founding innovations from my great-grandfather in 1943. A flash of something, alarm, anger, calculation, crossed Richard Harrington's face before his practiced smile returned. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand the financial pressure your family is under might lead to creative interpretations of old family documents. but making defamatory accusations against a company that's offering to help you could be a serious mistake. It's not defamation if it's true, I replied, heart pounding. And we have proof authenticated by a leading agricultural historian. Harrington's security personnel were now moving toward the barn, attempting to flank us. "Stop right there," my father called, his voice carrying the authority of a man defending his home. "You do not have permission to enter that building." The guards hesitated, looking to Harrington for direction. "Robert," Harrington said, switching tactics and using my father's first name as if they were old friends. "I understand your attachment to family history, but let's be practical. Your farm is 3 months from foreclosure. The bank has already discussed selling the property to us after repossession. Why fight the inevitable when you could walk away with dignity and financial security?" "Because some things matter more than money," my father replied, "like truth and justice." "Pretty words," Harrington said, his friendly facade cracking slightly, "but they won't pay your mortgage or secure your future. My offer stands for 24 hours, triple the market value for the farm, and an additional $250,000 for any historical materials you've discovered. After that, we'll pursue legal remedies to secure what rightfully belongs to Harrington Agricultural Industries." "Nothing here belongs to you," I said, "especially not the innovations you stole from my family." Harrington's face hardened. "Be careful, Ms. Mitchell. Companies like ours have very good memories and very long reach. People who cross us tend to find their options limited." "Are you threatening us, Mr. Harrington?" Sarah asked sharply, "because that would be extremely interesting to document for the court." Harrington spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Not at all. Simply offering friendly advice from someone who understands how the agricultural industry works. Consider our offer carefully. It won't come again." With that, he signaled to his entourage, and they retreated to their vehicles. As they drove away, I noticed one of the security guards lingering at the edge of our property, establishing what was clearly meant to be a surveillance position. "They'll be watching the farm," Sarah said, following my gaze. "And they'll be back with court orders, lawyers, whatever it takes. Can they really claim ownership of what we found?" I asked. "They can try," Sarah replied grimly, "and they have the resources to make it an exhausting fight. But first, they have to prove what's actually in that chamber, which means gaining access." "So we keep them out," my father said simply. "It's not that easy," Sarah cautioned. "They'll get a judge to issue an order for inspection, claiming potential intellectual property theft or some similar pretext. We need to move quickly to establish our own legal position." Dr. Cooper emerged from the barn, looking concerned. "I heard the commotion. Harrington himself, was it? That confirms the significance of what we've found." "How much more time? Do you need to document everything?" Sarah asked him. "For basic documentation, another few hours. For comprehensive analysis and proper preservation of the seed samples, days, possibly weeks." Sarah nodded decisively. "Complete the essential documentation first. Mr. Mitchell, Emma, we need to get as much of this evidence secured off-site as possible before they return with legal muscle." "We can't just remove everything," I protested. "This is our heritage, our history." "And it will remain so," Dr. Cooper assured me. "But the most critical evidence, particularly the patent documentation and the most significant seed samples, should be secured elsewhere. I can arrange for proper storage at the university's agricultural archive." "Will they be safe there?" my father asked. "The university has withstood pressure from agricultural corporations before," Dr. Cooper replied. "Academic freedom still counts for something, even in these times." As we formulated our plan, I couldn't help but feel that we were at a turning point. Not just for our farm, but for something larger. The seeds and knowledge preserved in that hidden chamber represented an alternative path for agriculture, one focused on resilience and sustainability rather than corporate profit. "There's one more thing we need to consider," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Public opinion. Harrington can fight us in court indefinitely, but they're vulnerable to public scrutiny. Their entire brand is built on an image of agricultural innovation and environmental stewardship." "You're suggesting we go public with this?" my father asked skeptically. "Strategically, yes. Not all at once, but enough to make them realize that pursuing this aggressively could backfire spectacularly. The agricultural community would be particularly interested," Dr. Cooper added. "Family farmers have been squeezed by companies like Harrington for decades. A story about how they built their empire by stealing innovations from a family farmer, that would resonate powerfully." As we continued planning our response, I stepped outside for a moment, needing fresh air and perspective. The afternoon, sun cast long shadows across fields that had sustained my family for generations. In the distance, I could see the Harrington security vehicle parked just off our property, a visible reminder of the forces aligned against us. Yet for the first time in months, I felt something other than despair when I looked at our land. The hidden chamber had revealed more than just seeds and documents. It had uncovered a legacy of innovation and resilience that ran in our family's blood. Whatever happened next, that legacy would endure. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Interesting development at the Mitchell farm. Seeking comment for regional agricultural news site. Call me. Eliza Wong, Heartland. Farming today." Word was already spreading. The battle for the hidden chamber and its contents was about to enter a new phase, one that would be fought not just on our land, but in courtrooms, newspapers, and the court of public opinion. I took a deep breath and walked back to the barn where my father, Sarah, and Dr. Cooper were carefully packing the most critical seed samples and documents for transport to the university. The future of Willow Creek Farm, and perhaps of farming itself, now depended on how well we could protect and share the treasure my ancestors had preserved for generations. "They're watching the road," I told the others, "and a reporter is already asking questions." Sarah looked up from the document she was examining. "Sooner than expected, but we can use that." "Dr. Cooper, how quickly can you verify the scientific significance of these seed varieties?" "I can have preliminary DNA analysis done within days," he replied. "My colleagues in the agricultural genetics department will be extremely interested in this discovery." "Good," Sarah nodded, "because we're going to need credible scientific voices when this story breaks." My father, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "I've been thinking about what Harrington said, about the bank already discussing selling to them after foreclosure. We need to address the immediate financial problem while we fight the larger battle." He was right. Even with the momentous discovery beneath the barn, we still faced the hard reality of an impending foreclosure that could make all our efforts moot. The seed varieties themselves could be the answer, Dr. Cooper suggested. "If we can quickly cultivate some of these drought-resistant strains and demonstrate their effectiveness, there would be significant commercial interest from Harrington's competitors, if nothing else." "How quickly could we get something growing?" I asked. "With greenhouse facilities at the university, we could have viable plants within weeks, enough to verify the claimed properties. Full field testing would take longer, of course. Weeks might not be soon enough," my father said grimly. "The bank won't wait." Sarah tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "What about a strategic partnership? There are smaller, agricultural companies that would jump at the chance to gain access to these genetics, especially with the added appeal of undermining Harrington's market position. Isn't that just trading one corporate master for another?" I asked. "Not necessarily," Dr. Cooper interjected. There are cooperative agricultural research organizations, farmer-owned entities that pool resources for mutual benefit. They might be ideal partners for this kind of discovery. As the discussion continued, I realized we were talking about more than just saving our farm. We were considering how to best steward a scientific and agricultural legacy that had been preserved for precisely this moment, when innovative, sustainable approaches to farming were needed most. Whatever path we chose, one thing was becoming clear. The hidden chamber my great-grandfather had created wasn't just a repository of the past. It was a seed bank for the future, one that might help not just our family farm, but family farms, everywhere facing the dual challenges of climate change and corporate consolidation. The question wasn't just whether we could save Willow Creek Farm, but whether the legacy preserved beneath its barn could help chart a new course for American agriculture itself. By dawn the next morning, we had transferred the most critical materials from the chamber to Dr. Cooper's university vehicle. Select seed samples, the original patent documentation, my grandfather's letter, and the most compelling research journals were carefully packed in archival containers. Dr. Cooper would ensure they reached the secure agricultural archive at Iowa State, where they would be properly preserved and documented beyond Harrington's reach. I stood in the driveway, watching the taillights of his car disappear down our long gravel road, feeling both relief and anxiety. We had protected the most important evidence, but the underground chamber, with its remaining seeds and historical artifacts, was still vulnerable. "They'll be back today," my father said, coming to stand beside me in the early morning light, with lawyers and probably court orders. "Sarah said she'll be here by 8, I replied. "She's bringing documentation to file for emergency historical preservation status for the property. Will that stop them?" "It might slow them down," I admitted, but Harrington didn't build an agricultural empire by respecting legal obstacles. My father nodded, his weathered face resolute. "Then we make sure we're ready for them." We spent the early morning hours securing the farm as best we could. I installed battery-powered trail cameras at strategic locations around the property, a precaution Sarah had suggested to document any unauthorized access attempts. My father checked the locks on every outbuilding and reinforced the barn doors. We even placed an old padlock on the trapdoor leading to the chamber. Not that it would stop determined intruders, but it would at least provide evidence of forced entry if they tried. The local sheriff, Mark Henderson, arrived just after 7. A lifelong Mapleton resident, Sheriff Henderson had known our family for decades. He'd gone to high school with my father. "Got a call from Richard Harrington himself last night," he said without preamble, declining my offer of coffee. "Claiming you folks might have stolen some proprietary materials from his company." My father stiffened. "That's absolutely false, Mark." The sheriff held up a placating hand. "I know that, Robert. I'm just telling you what's coming. Harrington's got a judge in his pocket over in Cedar County, Judge Franklin. Word is they're seeking a search warrant for your property this morning." "On what grounds?" I asked incredulously. "Something about intellectual property theft and evidence of corporate espionage, bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo that basically amounts to, we want to look around and we have the money to make it happen." "Can they do that?" My father's voice held a rare note of uncertainty. Sheriff Henderson sighed. "Technically, if they convince Franklin to sign off on it, yes. But county jurisdictions get tricky. They'd need to transfer the warrant here, which gives us a little time. I can probably slow the process down, make sure all the I's are dotted and T's crossed before anything happens." "We appreciate that, Mark," my father said. The sheriff nodded. "Just doing my job, which includes making sure nobody's rights get trampled by corporate lawyers." He glanced toward the barn. "Found something important, did you?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Important enough That Harrington himself showed up yesterday with security guards, my father said. Important enough that they're willing to use questionable legal tactics to get access to it. Sheriff Henderson whistled softly. Must be something special then. He adjusted his hat. Well, I'll do what I can to make sure everything stays above board. In the meantime, you might want to get yourselves a good lawyer. Already done, I replied. Sarah Jenkins is representing us. A small smile crossed the sheriff's face. Smart choice. That girl could argue circles around most of the attorneys in this state. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. I noticed a vehicle parked just off your property line last night during my rounds. Private security from the looks of it. They're watching the place. We know, my father said grimly. Might want to be careful what you move in and out. And Robert? The sheriff's expression grew serious. Whatever you found, I hope it helps you keep this land. Too many family farms lost already. After he left, Sarah arrived with a stack of legal documents and a determined expression. She'd been up most of the night researching precedents and preparing filings. I've submitted an emergency petition for historical preservation status for the underground chamber and its contents, she explained, spreading papers across our kitchen table. Based on Dr. Cooper's preliminary assessment of its agricultural and historical significance. That should create at least a temporary barrier to anyone attempting to remove or disturb the materials. Will it hold up? I asked. Against normal legal challenges? Probably. Against Harrington's resources? She shrugged. It buys us time, which is what we need most right now. Time for what? My father asked. Sarah's expression turned calculating. Time for the seed analysis Dr. Cooper is conducting. Time to establish the scientific legitimacy of William's research and innovations. And most importantly, time to make strategic decisions about how to use what you've discovered. She pulled out her laptop. Speaking of which, Eliza Wong from Heartland Farming Today has been doing some preliminary research after Emma's text exchange with her. She's found something interesting. Sarah turned the screen to show us a scholarly article about the history of drought-resistant corn development. This was published 15 years ago in an agricultural history journal, she explained. It mentions unsubstantiated rumors that Harrington's breakthrough drought-resistant corn varieties of the 1940s may have been inspired by experimental crops observed on local farms. The author dismissed these claims due to lack of documentary evidence, but suggested that the rapid development timeline was unusually accelerated compared to typical breeding programs of that era. So people have suspected this before, I said, scanning the article. But without proof, it remained just academic speculation, Sarah confirmed. What you've discovered provides that missing evidence. My father leaned forward, his work-worn hands splayed on the table. So what's our play here? Do we go public? Take it to court? Try to negotiate with Harrington? All of the above. Potentially, Sarah replied. But in a strategic sequence, we need to establish our position of strength before making any major moves. She outlined a three-phase approach. First, secure the evidence and obtain preliminary scientific verification. Second, prepare for legal action while putting subtle pressure on Harrington through carefully placed information. Third, decide whether to pursue litigation, partnership, or some combination of approaches once we understood the full value of what we'd discovered. The immediate priority is protecting the chamber and remaining materials from Harrington's search attempts, she concluded. If they gain access, they'll try to discredit or confiscate everything. The rumble of vehicles approaching interrupted our planning. Through the kitchen window, I counted 3 black SUVs and a sedan with government plates turning into our driveway. That was fast, my father muttered, rising from his chair. Remember, Sarah cautioned, gathering her papers, They may have a warrant, but it will have specific limitations. Don't interfere directly, but document everything. I'll handle the legal interaction. As we stepped onto the porch, Victoria Blackwell emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by the same thin lawyer from yesterday. Behind them came two sheriff's deputies from Cedar County, not our local department, and a man in an ill-fitting suit clutching official-looking documents. "Mr. Mitchell," Victoria called, her professional mask firmly in place. "I'm afraid we have an unpleasant duty to perform today. We've obtained a search warrant for your property based on credible evidence of corporate intellectual property theft." Sarah stepped forward. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, attorney for the Mitchell family. I'd like to see that warrant." The thin lawyer handed over the documents with a smirk. "Everything is in order, Counselor. Signed by Judge Franklin this morning. We're authorized to search the barn and any underground structures on the property." Sarah reviewed the papers carefully, her expression giving nothing away. "This warrant has jurisdictional issues," she said finally. "It was issued in Cedar County, but needs to be properly transferred and endorsed by the local authorities before execution." "That's being processed as we speak," the lawyer replied smoothly. "In the meantime, we're authorized to secure the premises to prevent destruction of evidence." "Actually," came a familiar voice, "that's not how it works in this county." Sheriff Henderson's patrol car pulled up behind the Harrington vehicles, its light bar flashing. He stepped out, deliberately adjusting his belt as he approached. "Morning, folks. Seems like we have a bit of a jurisdictional misunderstanding." He nodded to the Cedar County deputies, who looked uncomfortable. "Jim, Dave, little outside your usual patrol area, aren't you?" "We're executing a valid warrant, Sheriff Henderson," the thin lawyer interjected. "A Cedar County warrant," Henderson corrected, "which requires proper transfer procedures before execution in my jurisdiction. I don't see the transfer documentation or my department's endorsement on those papers." The lawyer's smile tightened. "This is a matter of considerable urgency, Sheriff. Corporate espionage doesn't override proper legal procedure." Henderson finished for him. "Now, you folks are welcome to wait while your paperwork gets properly processed. Might take a day or two, what with the backlog at the county clerk's office. Or you can come back when everything's in order." Victoria Blackwell stepped forward, her composure slipping slightly. "Sheriff, I assure you Harrington Agricultural Industries has significant concerns about intellectual property being compromised. The materials on this property could be destroyed or removed while we navigate unnecessary bureaucracy." "Nothing's being destroyed," my father said firmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop implying we're criminals on our own land." Henderson turned to the Cedar County deputies. "Boys, I'm going to have to ask you to stand down until this warrant is properly transferred to my jurisdiction. You understand, I'm sure." The deputies exchanged glances, clearly caught in an uncomfortable position. Finally, the senior officer nodded. "We'll head back and let the judge know about the jurisdictional issue." The thin lawyer looked furious. "This is obstruction. Harrington will remember this, Sheriff." Henderson remained unruffled. "Just following procedure, sir. I'm sure a company as law-abiding as Harrington appreciates the importance of doing things by the book." As the Cedar County deputies returned to their vehicle, Victoria made one last attempt. "Mr. Mitchell, this delay doesn't change the inevitable. We will gain access to whatever you've discovered. Wouldn't it be simpler to cooperate now and avoid further unpleasantness?" "I think we're done here," Sarah interjected. "As Sheriff Henderson explained, you currently have no legal authority to search this property. I suggest you leave before we file harassment charges." The standoff lasted several tense moments before Victoria signaled a retreat. As their vehicles pulled away, one of the Harrington security SUVs remained parked just beyond our property. Line, a silent reminder that we were still being watched. "That won't hold them off for long," Sheriff Henderson warned after the others had left. "Franklin will get the proper transfer paperwork pushed through eventually. I'd recommend using this time wisely." "We appreciate the help, Mark," my father said sincerely. The sheriff nodded. "Just upholding the law, Robert. Though for what it's worth, I've never been a fan of how Harrington operates in this county." He glanced toward the remaining security vehicle. "I'll have deputies drive by regularly, make sure they stay off your property." After Henderson left, Sarah turned to us with grim determination. "We have maybe 48 hours before they come back with properly executed paperwork. We need to move quickly." "What's the next step?" I asked. "We accelerate our timeline," she replied. "I'm going to contact Eliza Wong and arrange a preliminary interview. Nothing on the record yet, just background. Having a journalist already investigating will provide another layer of protection. And I'll reach out to some contacts at neighboring farms," my father added. "People I trust. We might need extra eyes and support if Harrington tries anything less than legal." By noon, our kitchen had transformed into an impromptu command center. Sarah was coordinating with Dr. Cooper, who reported that initial DNA analysis of the seed samples showed remarkable genetic diversity and several unique traits not present in modern commercial varieties. The university's agricultural preservation specialists were already excited by the scientific significance of the discovery. "The preliminary assessment from the genetics lab is extremely positive," Sarah reported, ending a call with Dr. Cooper. "They've confirmed that several of the corn varieties contain drought resistance traits that are distinct from and potentially superior to current commercial strains. More importantly, they've established clear genetic markers that can prove lineage between Williams' original varieties and Harrington's commercial products." "Can they determine when these varieties were developed?" I asked. "Carbon dating of the seed casings and genetic regression analysis should establish a timeline," she explained. "If the science confirms what the documentation suggests, we'll have irrefutable proof that Harrington's drought-resistant corn line originated with your great-grandfather's work." Meanwhile, I was carefully photographing and cataloging the remaining contents of the chamber, creating a comprehensive inventory that couldn't be easily dismissed or manipulated. My father had reached out to several neighboring farmers, old friends who understood the significance of preserving family farm heritage against corporate encroachment. By mid-afternoon, a rotating schedule of visitors had been established, ensuring that someone would always be present on the property to witness any attempted incursions. Eliza Wong arrived at 3 o'clock, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s with a recorder and a notebook full of questions. Sarah had briefed her on the general outlines of our discovery, but the agricultural journalist was clearly unprepared for the reality of the underground chamber. "This is extraordinary," she breathed as I led her down the narrow stairs. "An entire agricultural research facility preserved from the 1940s. My great-grandfather built it during World War II, I explained, watching as she took in the seed cabinets, research journals, and wall diagrams. He was developing drought-resistant crops decades before they became a commercial priority. And you're saying Harrington's early success with drought-resistant corn was based on work stolen from here?" Her journalistic skepticism was evident, but so was her interest. "We have documentation," I confirmed, showing her copies of the materials Dr. Cooper had taken to the university. Photographs, research journals, even visitor logs showing James Harrington himself toured this farm in 1943, months before filing patents on suspiciously similar corn varieties. Eliza took meticulous notes as I explained the significance of various items in the chamber. Her questions were pointed and knowledgeable. She clearly understood the agricultural and historical implications of what we'd discovered. "You realize what you're alleging?" she said finally, closing her notebook. Harrington Agricultural is a multi-billion-dollar corporation built on its reputation for innovation. You're saying their founding breakthrough was actually stolen from a family farmer? The evidence speaks for itself, I replied. We're not making accusations without proof. And what do you want to happen now? She asked, the key journalistic question. What's your goal here? I hesitated, realizing we hadn't fully articulated our endgame. Justice for my great-grandfather's work, certainly. Recognition of his contribution to agricultural science. And I gestured to the fields visible through the barn door above us. A chance to save this farm using the very innovations that should have secured its future generations ago. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. It's a compelling story, Ms. Mitchell, one that many family farmers would relate to, but going public means taking on a powerful enemy with virtually unlimited resources. We're aware of the risks. I'll need time to verify some of this independently, she said, and I'd want to include Harrington's response in any article, but if the evidence holds up... She looked around the chamber again. This could be the biggest agricultural history story of the decade. After she left, promising to begin her verification process immediately, but publish nothing without our approval, Sarah, my father, and I gathered to assess our position. Harrington will have their proper warrant within 48 hours, Sarah reiterated. Once that happens, they'll gain access to this chamber and everything in it. We need to decide our strategy before then. Do we try to negotiate? My father asked. Use what we've found as leverage? Sarah considered this. It's an option. Harrington might be willing to make significant concessions to keep this quiet. Financial compensation, forgiveness of the banknotes, possibly even licensing agreements for the heritage seed varieties. Or they might just bury everything once they get access, I countered. These corporations don't exactly have a history of acknowledging past wrongs. Which is why I think we need to establish our position more publicly before any negotiation, Sarah suggested. Not a full expose, but enough that Harrington knows they can't simply make this disappear. My father, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. I've been thinking about what matters most here. Sure, the money would help. God knows we need it with the foreclosure looming, but this discovery isn't just about saving our farm. What do you mean? I asked. Your great-grandfather preserved these seeds and this research for a reason, he said. He believed in agricultural diversity and resilience when the industry was pushing toward standardization. He was trying to develop crops that could withstand challenging conditions, exactly what farmers need now more than ever with climate change creating more extreme weather patterns. He gestured toward the chamber. This isn't just our family heritage. It's agricultural heritage that belongs to all farmers. Using it just to save our one farm seems limited. I studied my father with newfound respect. Despite the immediate financial pressure we faced, he was thinking beyond our own situation to the broader implications of what we'd discovered. What are you suggesting? Sarah asked. I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted, but I know I don't want Harrington to bury this discovery or lock it away in their corporate vaults. These seeds and this research could help a lot of farmers facing the same challenges we are. There might be a middle path, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. What if instead of either selling to Harrington or fighting them in a protracted legal battle, we establish some kind of agricultural heritage trust, a way to preserve both the land and the scientific legacy? Sarah tapped her pen against her notepad, considering this. It's an interesting approach. We could potentially structure an agreement where the historical and scientific materials are preserved and made accessible through a university or non-profit partnership while still pursuing compensation from Harrington for the past appropriation. The farm itself could become a working demonstration site, I continued, the vision becoming clearer, showing how these heritage varieties and sustainable methods can still be viable today, maybe even developing new drought-resistant varieties based on William's original work. My father's eyes lit up. That's thinking like a Mitchell, using innovation to preserve both the land and its purpose. It's also potentially a stronger negotiating position, Sarah pointed out pragmatically. Harrington might be more willing to settle financially if the alternative isn't just a damaging news story, but a permanent, visible reminder of their historical appropriation. As we discussed the possibilities, the phone rang. It was Dr. Cooper with news from the university lab. The preliminary genetic analysis confirms everything, he reported, his voice excited. The drought resistance traits in William's preserved seed varieties show clear markers that are present in Harrington's commercial lines. More importantly, carbon dating of the seed casings confirms these varieties existed years before Harrington filed their first patents. Can you document this conclusively? Sarah asked. Absolutely. We're preparing a formal scientific assessment now. And Emma, there's something else. Some of these heritage varieties show resilience characteristics that might actually be superior to modern commercial strains, especially for the changing climate conditions in the Midwest. They're not just historically significant. They're potentially valuable for current agricultural challenges. After the call, we sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the implications. What my great-grandfather had hidden away wasn't just evidence of a historical injustice. It was potentially a resource for addressing one of modern farming's most pressing challenges. We need to protect these seeds and this research, I said firmly, not just for our family, but for what they represent. My father nodded in agreement. So we fight. Strategically, Sarah amended. We use every tool available: legal, public opinion, scientific validation, and negotiation. But yes, we fight to ensure this legacy isn't lost or controlled by the very company that appropriated it in the first place. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farmyard, I felt a profound connection to the land and to the generations of Mitchells who had worked it. My great-grandfather hadn't just been a farmer. He'd been an innovator who understood that agriculture's strength came from diversity and resilience rather than standardization and control. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Harrington would use every resource at their disposal to maintain their corporate narrative and protect their market position. But for the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. Not just for saving our farm, but for honoring a legacy that had waited decades to be rediscovered. That evening, as we prepared for whatever the next day might bring, my father stood on the porch, looking out over fields that had been in our family for 4 generations. "You know," he said quietly when I joined him, "I always wondered why my grandfather Harold was so bitter about the big agricultural companies. He would mutter about thieves in business suits whenever Harrington was mentioned, but he never explained why. I thought it was just an old farmer's resentment of changing times." "Now we know," I replied. "Now we know," he agreed, "and knowing changes everything." The sun set over Willow Creek Farm, casting golden light across land that had sustained my family through war, depression, drought, and countless challenges. Whatever came next, court battles, corporate pressure, public scrutiny, we would face it with the same resilience that had preserved those seeds beneath our barn for over 80 years. The hidden chamber wasn't just a repository of the past. It was a seed bank for the future. And like the carefully preserved varieties it contained, its true value would only be realized when exposed to the light and allowed to grow. The overnight transformation of Willow Creek Farm, from struggling family operation to the center of an agricultural controversy, was nothing short of remarkable. By morning, Eliza Wong's preliminary article had appeared on the Heartland Farming Today website, not yet revealing the full details of our discovery, but raising pointed questions about Harrington agricultural industry's early drought-resistant corn patents and their suspiciously rapid development during the 1940s. The Mitchell family of Mapleton may have uncovered documentation suggesting one of America's agricultural giants built its empire on innovations developed and potentially misappropriated from a family farm. The article stated carefully, independent agricultural historians and geneticists are currently evaluating the evidence. The response was immediate. By 9 a.m., Harrington's PR team had issued a statement dismissing the allegations as baseless claims from a financially distressed farm family and an unfortunate attempt to extract concessions during a pending property negotiation. By 10 a.m., 3 more news outlets had picked up the story, and Dr. Cooper reported that his university phone was ringing constantly with inquiries from agricultural researchers, historians, and journalists. The properly executed search warrant that Harrington had been pursuing was suddenly complicated by intense public scrutiny. "They'll be more careful now," Sarah observed, reviewing the social media response to the initial coverage. Harrington can't just storm in and seize everything without raising more suspicions. Public opinion is already turning against them. My father seemed both bemused and heartened by the rapid developments. Never thought I'd see the day when people cared this much about old seeds and farming journals. It's not just about the seeds, I pointed out. It's the David versus Goliath narrative, a family farm fighting against corporate power. That resonates with people, especially other farmers who felt squeezed by big agriculture. Our strategy session was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A sleek European sedan pulled into our driveway, and a woman in her 60s emerged, elegant in a way that suggested old money, with silver hair pulled back in a simple twist and minimal jewelry that I suspected cost more than our tractor. "Ms. Mitchell," she called as I stepped onto the porch. "I'm Margaret Harrington. I believe we should talk." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Margaret Harrington, Richard's wife, chairwoman of the Harrington Family Foundation, and, by reputation, the true power behind the Harrington agricultural empire. Her presence on our farm was equivalent to a state visit from royalty, or perhaps more accurately, a general personally taking command of a battlefield. "This is private property, Mrs. Harrington," I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. She smiled thinly. "I'm quite aware. I'm also aware that my husband's approach to this situation has been characteristically heavy-handed. Perhaps a different perspective might be beneficial." Sarah appeared at my side. "Any discussion would need to include legal counsel." "Of course," Margaret agreed smoothly. "I wouldn't expect otherwise." We reluctantly invited her into our kitchen, the heart of our home now doubling as our war room, with documents and laptops scattered across the table. If Margaret Harrington was surprised or disdainful of our modest farmhouse, she didn't show it, accepting a cup of coffee with gracious thanks. "Let me be direct," she said, setting the mug down carefully. "This emerging situation has the potential to be damaging for all involved. My husband believes in aggressive litigation, but I've always preferred more elegant solutions." "What kind of solution did you have in mind?" Sarah asked cautiously. Margaret's gaze was steady and calculating. "The Harrington Family Foundation is prepared to establish a substantial agricultural heritage fund in honor of William Mitchell. This would include financial compensation for his unacknowledged contributions to drought-resistant crop development, preservation of your farm as a historical agricultural site, and university partnerships to study the seed varieties you've discovered." The offer was surprisingly close to what we had been discussing ourselves. Too close, perhaps. "And in return?" I asked, suspecting the catch. The documentation regarding James Harrington's 1943 visit and subsequent patent filings would remain private, preserved in university archives, but subject to a non-disclosure agreement for 25 years. She sipped her coffee. History would recognize William Mitchell's contributions without explicitly acknowledging any impropriety in Harrington's early business practices. My father, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "You want to acknowledge the innovation without admitting the theft." Margaret didn't flinch at the blunt characterization. "I prefer to think of it as balancing historical recognition with current business realities. Harrington Agricultural employs thousands of people and feeds millions. Its stability matters beyond just our family interests." Sarah leaned forward. "And if we decline this offer, then Richard's approach prevails," Margaret replied simply. "Years of litigation, unlimited legal resources deployed against you, and the very real possibility that these valuable historical artifacts become entangled in court proceedings where no one benefits." It was a masterfully constructed offer, generous enough to be tempting, cleverly aligned with our own values regarding agricultural heritage, yet carefully protecting the Harrington legacy from the most damaging aspects of our discovery. "We'll need time to consider," Sarah said diplomatically. "Of course." Margaret stood, smooth and unhurried. "I'll leave my private number, but I should note that this offer comes from me, not the corporate entity. If Richard's legal strategy advances further, my ability to intervene will diminish." After she departed, we sat in stunned silence for several moments. "That was, I began. "Fascinating," Sarah finished. "She's offering substantially what we were hoping to achieve, while protecting the Harrington name from the worst of the scandal." My father rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The question is whether recognition without accountability is enough, and whether we trust them to honor any agreement," I added. Our deliberation was cut short by Dr. Cooper calling with urgent news. The university genetics team had completed their preliminary analysis of the heritage seed samples. "Emma, this goes beyond historical significance," he said, his voice charged with excitement. 3 of William's corn varieties show drought resistance traits that outperform modern commercial lines by 22–28% in initial tests. One variety demonstrates resistance to a fungal blight that's been plaguing Midwest crops for the past 5 years. These aren't just historically valuable, they're commercially and scientifically revolutionary. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, putting the call on speaker so my father and Sarah could hear. "It means you're sitting on genetic resources that could transform modern agriculture's approach to climate resilience," Dr. Cooper explained. "Several major seed companies besides Harrington would pay handsomely for access to these genetics. More importantly, these varieties represent an alternative approach to agricultural resilience, one based on natural selection and biodiversity rather than genetic modification and patented traits." The implications were staggering. What my great-grandfather had preserved wasn't just evidence of a historical injustice, it was potentially a roadmap to a different agricultural future, one where family farms could access climate-resilient crops without dependency on corporate-controlled seed lines. "This changes our negotiating position considerably," Sarah noted after the call ended. "We're not just dealing with historical recognition and compensation anymore. These seed varieties have immediate commercial and scientific value." "Which explains why both Harringtons showed up personally," my father observed. "They're not just protecting their historical reputation, they're trying to control potentially competing technology." "So what do we do?" I asked, looking between them. Margaret's offer seemed reasonable until this new information. Sarah considered the question carefully. "We counter-offer. The Agricultural Heritage Foundation is a good start, but we ensure the seed genetics remain accessible to independent researchers and family farms, not exclusively controlled by Harrington or anyone else. A seed trust, my father suggested, something that preserves not just the physical seeds, but the approach to agriculture they represent, diversified, resilient, locally adapted. The concept resonated deeply with me. It honored not just the specific innovations my great-grandfather had developed, but his broader vision of agriculture, one where genetic diversity and local adaptation were valued over standardization and corporate control. As we refined our counterproposal, Sheriff Henderson called with a warning. The jurisdictional delays he'd created were running out. Harrington's legal team had successfully transferred the search warrant to our county, and it would be executable by morning. They'll be here first thing tomorrow, he advised. Nothing I can do to stop it now. Best prepare yourselves. We spent the evening finalizing our strategy. Sarah drafted a formal counter-proposal to Margaret Harrington while arranging for additional legal support from her firm. I worked with Dr. Cooper to ensure comprehensive documentation of everything remaining in the chamber. My father reached out to neighboring farmers, many of whom pledged to show up as witnesses when Harrington's team arrived with their warrant. By dawn, a remarkable scene had unfolded at Willow Creek Farm. 24 pickup trucks lined our driveway and the road leading to our property. Local farmers, many facing their own struggles against corporate agriculture, had arrived in a show of solidarity. Some brought coffee and homemade breakfast. Others simply stood quietly, arms crossed, a human barrier between our barn and whatever corporate force might arrive. Word spread, Thomas Wilson explained, the neighbor who had sold his own farm to Harrington months earlier. His eyes held a mixture of regret and resolve. Not everyone's ready to give up on family farming just yet. Sheriff Henderson arrived shortly after, looking both impressed and concerned by the gathering. "This is peaceful, right, Robert?" he confirmed with my father. "Absolutely," my father assured him. "Just neighbors supporting neighbors. No one's looking for trouble." The sheriff nodded. "Good, because Harrington's people are on their way. Got a call. They're bringing their own security detail along with the legal team. We'll stay calm," I promised. "This isn't about confrontation. It's about witnessing." When Harrington's convoy arrived, 3 black SUVs, a van marked Heritage, Recovery Services, and Richard Harrington's personal vehicle, they were met with a sea of weathered faces and crossed arms. Farmers of all ages, men and women whose families had worked this land for generations, stood in silent witness. Richard Harrington emerged from his car, visibly taken aback by the scene. His legal team huddled nervously, clearly unprepared for this community response. Victoria Blackwell approached with the executed warrant, her professional demeanor strained. "Ms. Mitchell, we have legal authorization to search the barn and any underground structures," she said, handing the document to Sarah. "We'd appreciate your cooperation." Sarah reviewed the paperwork carefully. "The warrant appears to be in order. My clients will not obstruct the legal search. However, we will observe and document every aspect of it." She gestured to the farmers around us. "As will these community members who are lawfully present as witnesses." Richard Harrington stepped forward, his patience visibly thinning. "This theatrical display is unnecessary. We're conducting a legal search for potentially stolen intellectual property." "Nothing has been stolen," my father replied calmly. "Unless you count what your father took from mine in 1943. A murmur ran through the gathered farmers. Many had now heard fragments of our story through community grapevine. Harrington's jaw tightened. "These baseless historical allegations are supported by extensive documentation," I interrupted. "Documentation that's already being analyzed by independent experts at 3 universities." This was a calculated revelation, one Sarah had advised. Letting Harrington know that secure copies of the evidence already existed beyond his reach changed the dynamics of the search. "Let's proceed," Victoria interjected, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "Our team will need access to the barn." We led them through the crowd of farmers, who parted silently but remained watchful. Inside the barn, the trapdoor to the underground chamber stood open. We had decided transparency was our best approach now that the most critical evidence was secured elsewhere. The Heritage Recovery Services team turned out to be professional, archivists and document specialists equipped with cameras, preservation materials, and scanning equipment. They descended into the chamber with evident excitement, their professional interest in the historical materials temporarily overriding corporate objectives. "This is remarkable preservation," one whispered, examining the seed storage system. "Museum quality." For nearly 3 hours, they meticulously documented everything in the chamber, scanning journals, photographing diagrams, and carefully examining the remaining seed collections. Throughout the process, Sarah ensured they followed the exact parameters of the warrant, while I kept detailed notes of everything they handled. Richard Harrington observed with increasingly evident frustration. The warrant had authorized them to search for misappropriated corporate intellectual property, but what they found instead was clearly original research that predated Harrington's patents. The very thoroughness of their documentation was creating an official record of our claims. By mid-morning, Margaret Harrington arrived, taking in the scene with calculating eyes. She and Richard conferred in hushed tones near their vehicles, their conversation appearing tense. When they returned to the barn, it was Margaret who addressed us. "Ms. Mitchell, perhaps we could continue our discussion from yesterday in light of today's developments." We retreated to the farmhouse, leaving the documentation team under Sarah's watchful eye. In our kitchen, with my father present, Margaret laid out a revised offer. The Harrington Family Foundation is prepared to establish an agricultural heritage trust in William Mitchell's name with a $10 million endowment, she began. This would include preservation of Willow Creek Farm as a working heritage farm and research center focusing on drought-resistant and climate-adaptive agriculture. She continued, outlining a comprehensive proposal that included university partnerships, educational programs for family farmers, and a seed-sharing initiative for heritage crop varieties. In addition, she said carefully, Harrington Agricultural would formally acknowledge William Mitchell's pioneering work in drought-resistant crop development and establish a profit-sharing arrangement for any commercial applications derived from his preserved seed genetics. "And the documentation regarding James Harrington's actions," Sarah pressed. Margaret's expression remained composed. "Full academic access after a 7-year embargo period, significantly reduced from my previous offer. The historical record would be preserved, just contextually managed in the short term. It was a substantial concession, one that would allow the truth to emerge while giving Harrington time to prepare for the reputational impact. More importantly, it ensured the seed genetics and sustainable farming methods my great-grandfather had developed would benefit family farmers rather than being locked away in corporate vaults. There's one more condition," I said, having discussed this privately with my father. "The trust must include support for transitioning family farms to sustainable methods, particularly those facing climate challenges. This isn't just about preserving history, it's about creating a future for family farming." Margaret studied me with newfound respect. "You're not just looking to save your own farm." "My great-grandfather didn't preserve these seeds just for our family," I replied. "He kept them for when they'd be needed most. That time is now for all farmers facing these challenges." After further negotiation on specifics, we reached preliminary terms that satisfied both parties, a remarkable outcome given the confrontational beginning. As the Harrington entourage finally departed late that afternoon, the farmers who had stood witness throughout the day gathered around to hear the results. My father addressed them from our porch steps. "Willow Creek Farm will remain a working farm," he announced to cheers and applause. "But more importantly, what we've discovered here will help family farms throughout the region adapt to changing conditions. William Mitchell's legacy will live on through all of us." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Legal documents were drafted and signed, establishing the William Mitchell Agricultural Heritage Trust with joint oversight from the Harrington Foundation, Iowa State University, and a board comprising family farmers and agricultural scientists. The foreclosure proceedings against our farm were withdrawn as part of the settlement, and preliminary research began on propagating the heritage seed varieties. Dr. Cooper led the scientific team, working with geneticists to understand and preserve the unique properties of Williams seeds. Initial field trials showed promising results. The heritage corn varieties indeed demonstrated superior drought resistance and yield stability compared to modern commercial lines. Most satisfying was watching the underground chamber transform. From a hidden secret to an active research space, university students carefully catalogued and digitized the journals and diagrams, creating a comprehensive database of Williams' sustainable farming methods. The seed preservation system he had designed was studied and adapted for modern seed-saving initiatives. 3 months after our discovery, as summer heat shimmered over newly planted test plots of Williams corn varieties, I stood with my father at the edge of our fields. The crops looked different from the uniform rows of modern hybrid corn in neighboring farms, more varied in height, with subtle differences in hue and structure that reflected their genetic diversity. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," my father said, watching researchers move through the test plots taking measurements. "Not just that we saved the farm, but that his work is helping others." "Do you think he knew?" I asked. "When he sealed that chamber, did he realize how important these seeds would become?" My father considered this. "I think he understood something that agriculture has forgotten in recent decades, that diversity is strength, that standardization might increase short-term yields, but resilience comes from variety and adaptation." As we walked back toward the farmhouse, now headquarters for the Heritage Trust's operations, I reflected on how dramatically our situation had changed. The farm, that had been weeks away from foreclosure, was now a thriving center for agricultural research and education. Farmers from across the Midwest were visiting to learn about climate-adaptive farming methods and participate in the Heritage Seed program. Most meaningful was the gradual transformation in how local farmers viewed their own operations. The corporate agricultural model had seemed inevitable and irresistible for so long that many had given up hope for alternatives. Now, seeing the practical results of diversity-focused, sustainable methods adapted to local conditions, many were reconsidering their approach. Thomas Wilson, who had sold his own farm to Harrington months earlier, became the Trust's first farm transition coordinator, helping neighboring farms implement sustainable practices. "Can't get my land back," he'd explained, "but I can help others keep theirs." The settlement with Harrington had achieved something more valuable than mere financial compensation or historical recognition. It had created a practical pathway for family farms to remain viable in changing conditions, economic, environmental, and social. 1 year after breaking through that barn floor, I stood in the underground chamber, now properly reinforced, climate-controlled, and transformed into the seed bank for the Heritage Trust. The original seed cabinets remained, now supplemented with modern preservation equipment. William's workbench had been carefully restored, his journals displayed in protective cases, while digital copies made his research accessible to farmers. Worldwide, on the wall hung a simple plaque, "The William Mitchell Seed Sanctuary, preserving the past, seeding the future." Below it, in smaller text, "Some treasures need to stay buried until scarcity makes their value obvious." My great-grandfather's words, recorded in my grandfather's journal, now served as the Trust's unofficial motto. He had understood something profound about the cyclical nature of agriculture and human knowledge, that innovations sometimes need to be preserved until the world is ready to appreciate them. As I ran my fingers along the seed cabinets that had protected his legacy for 8 decades, I felt a deep connection to the generations of Mitchells who had worked this land. They had been more than just farmers. They had been stewards of both, soil and knowledge, preserving diversity when monoculture seemed inevitable, maintaining resilience when standardization was the norm. Outside, the autumn sun cast golden light across fields where test plots of William's heritage corn varieties stood tall despite the drought that had stressed conventional crops throughout the region. Researchers were carefully harvesting seeds for next year's expanded trials, while visiting farmers observed the results with growing interest. The corporate agricultural model that had seemed unstoppable was now facing its most significant challenge, not from regulations or protests, but from the practical reality of changing climate conditions. The centralized, standardized approach was proving vulnerable precisely where William's diverse, adaptable methods showed strength. Richard Harrington had retired shortly after our settlement, citing health concerns. Industry analysts suggested the company was repositioning itself in light of emerging agricultural trends. Corporate speak for the growing movement toward resilient, locally adapted farming methods that our discovery had accelerated. Margaret. Harrington had proven a surprisingly committed partner in the Heritage Trust, bringing organizational expertise and funding connections that amplified its impact. The future of agriculture will be different from its past, she had acknowledged at the Trust's formal inauguration. Wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected sources. As for me, I had found my place, not in the city career I'd half-heartedly pursued, but in bridging the worlds of traditional farming knowledge and modern agricultural science. My training in agricultural science once seemed wasted, now provided the technical vocabulary to translate my great-grandfather's intuitive understanding into terms contemporary researchers could appreciate. The hidden chamber beneath our barn had contained more than seeds and documents. It had preserved an approach to agriculture based on observation, adaptation, and respect for natural systems, precisely the qualities needed to navigate the challenges of a changing climate. My father joined me in the seed sanctuary, his weathered hands touching the cabinets with reverence. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said quietly. "All those years we struggled, the answer was right here beneath our feet." "Maybe. It wasn't time yet," I suggested. "Maybe the world wasn't ready to hear what William had to say until the evidence became impossible to ignore." He nodded thoughtfully. "There's something almost poetic about it. The seeds waiting in darkness until they were needed most." We climbed the stairs together, emerging into the barn that now served as the Trust's education center. Through the open doors, I could see a group of young farmers gathered around Dr. Cooper as he explained the principles behind William's drought-resistant corn varieties. "The future of farming isn't about technological silver bullets," he was saying. "It's about diversity, adaptation, and working with natural systems rather than trying to override them. William Mitchell understood that 80 years ago. We're just catching up to his wisdom." As we walked toward them, I felt the weight of the family legacy I now carried, not as a burden, but as a responsibility and an honor. The chamber my great-grandfather had hidden beneath our barn had saved more than just our farm. It had preserved a vision of agriculture that might help family farms everywhere adapt and survive. Willow Creek Farm had become more than a piece of land. It was now a living laboratory where past and future met, where ancient agricultural wisdom combined with modern science to create something resilient and new. The hidden chamber, once sealed in darkness, had brought its treasures into the light just when they were needed most. And that, I realized, was the most profound legacy William Mitchell had left. Not just the seeds themselves, but the recognition that sometimes the most valuable innovations are those preserved against the prevailing wisdom of their time, waiting patiently for the moment when the world is ready to receive them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.